Hey everybody, it's the Pyrokin. So I just wrapped up my playthrough of Boneworks, and I figured I'd go ahead and talk about my experience and what I think of the game so far. For this review, I'm going to be looking at the basics: controls, gameplay, and story. Starting with controls, Boneworks does a really good job of integrating the tutorial with gameplay in the museum level. Because you are in a virtual reality within this VR game, this style of control demonstration makes sense and builds the player's immersion. My one issue with this form of immersive tutorial, however, is that it can be difficult to retain all the information for situations later in the game, as there may not be a helpful hint or micro-tutorial nearby. Otherwise, it works well for the world that Stress Level 0 is building here. As for the actual controls, they're okay. At the time of reviewing, I don't recall there being a way to change button mapping, which is unfortunate for people with a particular playstyle or controller setup. I also found it strange that the jump and slow motion buttons are switched between your left and right index controller. Otherwise, I generally found the controls themselves to be intuitive enough, save for the few times when I confused the jump and slow motion buttons on my index controllers. As long as you stick with using a specific hand for button presses and use the other for locomotion, you should be good. Moving over to gameplay, we can look at how physics-based VR fares. At the time Boneworks was released, it was very unique in how it treated the player's avatar as an interactable object with other objects in the game. Your VR body doesn't phase through the world, it has resistance. For the most part, your avatar occupying space and having mass makes gameplay more interesting, but it can also create some challenges you wouldn't expect. One frustrating issue I found is that if you jump and grab a ledge, you can't easily pull yourself up, if at all. Other than that, it's pretty fun to just grab enemies' heads, kick them down, and beat on them while they flail helplessly. Combat is pretty decent, if a bit basic. Melee combat can be a bit fatiguing, especially if you're like me and just flail your arms at enemies to get them away from you. Gunplay is straightforward too. By using mostly magazine-fed weapons, it's simple to reload and shoot at enemies. To be honest, there's not a lot more to say about the combat other than it just works. Even many of the enemies feel uninspired. There are really only null bodies and their reskins, the VR head crabs, and the Omni projectors that you can encounter. Lastly, in gameplay, we have first-person platforming. This helped to change the pace and break up the monotony of combat and allowed you to explore the world more. With platforming, I found that running, jumping, and climbing obstacles were probably my favorite parts of Boneworks. It felt so rewarding to finally climb up to an area after physical effort to get there. I think the platforming gameplay shines especially well when paired with physics-based VR, and it would have been great to see more agility course type levels in the game. Overall, I'd have to say the physics-based movement and novelty of Boneworks is what made the game fun for me. The combat and enemies felt somewhat generic and didn't really do much to keep my attention, and if it weren't for the platforming, this would have felt like a generic shooter. Finally, let's get into the story. You'd be forgiven for not exactly remembering what Boneworks is about or what's going on, considering Stress Level 0 pulls a Five Nights at Freddy's with their game universe. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the Game Theorist video, linked in the description, but basically the actions that occur in Boneworks are connected to Stress Level 0's other game, Duck Season. The gist in Boneworks is that you are a security director, Arthur Ford, going into MythOS to dispose of anomalous items and then reset the game clock. Arthur appears to have ulterior motives to get into something known as the Void Way to become immortal. Every now and again there are videos of Arthur's coworkers or Arthur himself from the real world that help further the story and exposition outside MythOS. But that's about as much information as you get aside from some notes laying around. I personally enjoy this style of storytelling and cross-title universes, but it can be incredibly difficult to follow if you aren't tracking every small detail. Even then, you still have to look at other videos and sources just to understand how the wires connect. To wrap things up, Boneworks is a pretty decent game with fun movement mechanics and an interesting story. Considering Boneworks was one of the first titles to have proper physics-based VR, I think it did alright. I'm definitely looking forward to their newer games and seeing how the Stress Level 0 universe story plays out. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe. If you have a specific game you want to see me play or review, feel free to drop a comment down below. And in the meantime, I'll be playing more VR games. See you guys next time. Bye bye.